Very warm welcome, Jayesh. You're welcome to the Cloud Chat series, and this is the new series that we are starting on governance. And the name of the series, as you all know, is Good Governance for Sustainable Development, because we know that sustainability is something which is driven top down, and we have to ensure that it is taken in the right sort of priority and importance at the top level, and then the right policies and frameworks will be put in place in order to see the right admission. So before we start, I would like to introduce our special guest. Though Jayesh needs no introduction, anybody who is in India knows Jayesh is the person behind all the good work happening in Telangana. However, just to do the formalities, Mr. Jayesh Ranjan is the Principal Secretary of Industries and Commerce and IT Department of Telangana government. Apart from that, he is also a Swedish fellow, and he is also very much interested in social causes and sustainable development issues. And he has been instrumental in a lot of innovation related work and sustainable development work and charity boards that he is already on for several organizations. So welcome, Jayesh, once again, and we look forward to a fruitful interaction.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gayatri. Pleasure to be here with you this evening.
Thank you, Jayesh. So we will start with the basic question that what do we understand by good governance? So we see that there are 8 elements to good governance, and while the law and policies could be one thing, the most important, which according to me I would call it, is transparency and responsiveness. So when we are trying to make policies, when we are trying to bring in reforms, how do you ensure that transparency and responsiveness is brought in to the work that you do at Telangana?
Sure. So, Gayatri, these two things that you speak about, transparency and responsiveness, these are extremely important. But I will put a meta category, which in my opinion is a real essence of good governance, which is how people-centric you are.
Absolutely.
Of course, accountability, transparency, responsiveness, in some ways, they are all kind of subsumed in how people-centric you are. So this, in my opinion, is a very fundamental, very foundational trait of good governance. And in the context of sustainability, you mentioned a while ago that it needs to be driven from the top. You do have to drive it from the top. But at the same time, your stakeholders, your partners are at the bottom. So you cannot forget them. And therefore, it's a mix of a bottoms-up approach and a top-down. So certain support you definitely have to provide from the top. But eventually, the action on the ground happens bottoms-up. And unless you are able to elicit a genuine sense of stakeholdership or partnership or participation, then you may like to drive so many things from the top, but nothing will happen at the bottom. So it's a mix of it's a kind of a, you have to piece things together in a very meticulous way. Top down intention, top down support, top down supervision, but lots of empowerment at the bottom level. Also understanding the priorities bottoms up. So when we were prepping for this conversation, I had told you that I'll give you lots of examples from Telangana.
Right.
I want to give theoretical answers and bookish kind of answers. I want to give these answers on actual experiences. So I want to give experience of answers. So let me give you straight away the first example which I wanted to share. See, in India, as you know, we have at least a age-old or an ancient Panchayat Raj system. I mean, we have local bodies which are called panchayats, and there are thousands and thousands of panchayats. But in many states, barring a few, for example, Kerala is a very good example of a success story of how panchayats are given responsibility, how funds and responsibilities are devolved to them. So the real grassroots level of governance, administration in Telangana for the last so many, I mean, earlier, of course, as you know, Telangana was a part of the combined state of Andhra Pradesh. So for the last so many years, for so many decades, panchayats were existing only symbolically. I mean, for namesake, there is a panchayat, there is a president or a sarpanch as we call, there is some local panchayat body, panchayat committee, but for all practical purposes, it is the government officials at the district level, at the block level, and even at the state level who will decide everything. So what should be done in a panchayat, I will tell sitting from Hyderabad, and then that's how it was. So about a couple of years ago, our state government brought out a new law, the new Panchayat Raj law. And also for towns, we brought a new municipal law. So this law, these two laws rather, the Panchayat Raj law and the municipal laws, are extremely transformative. If you read these laws, you will notice two things. One is that every possible function which immediately impacts the people, those have been decentralized to these levels. So no more sitting in Hyderabad and deciding what decisions to be taken, what will be good for the people. The decisions will be taken at the local level, and obviously the sarpanch in the case of the panchayat, and the town chief, who could be called a mayor or whatever his designation is. He is the person at the town level. While they have been given lots of decision-making authority in a collective way, but lots of accountability, checks and balances have also been put. So I'll give you an example. The Gram Panchayat, it has been mandated, because I will speak about a very ambitious program at a later point. I'm sure one of your questions will lead to that topic, which is a tree plantation program which we do in our state, which is called Harita Haram. So our state has a massive tree plantation program going on, and obviously everyone has to plant trees. So panchayats have also been asked to plant trees. They have been given funds, they have been given the space where they will plant tree, but lots of responsibilities have also been given. So it is not just planting trees, they also have to ensure that the trees survive, and a huge element of accountability has been put. So for example, if the survival rate is let us say the average survival rate in the state is let us say 80%. In some years, there could be drought, there could be heavy rains, as is happening right now. For a variety of reasons, you cannot get 100% survival, and there will be some natural kind of atrophy. So let us say you get 80%. Now suppose you are far behind that 80% average. Suppose your survival is only 50%, your survival is only 60%. The government has the power in this act to completely change the panchayat body. I mean, if you fail to survive, make the trees survive, the entire Gram Panchayat can be replaced, and a new set of Gram Panchayat people
It
will
is
be.
quite incentivized that way.
Absolutely. And of course, I was about to say this, and suppose your survival is very high, suppose you get 100% on all, then there are lots of incentives also. You get additional funds and so on and so forth. And I just gave this example of the tree plantation program. How do you improve the tree cover? The essence of what I'm trying to tell you is that lots of devolution, lots of further decentralization has happened with a very strong system of accountability. I'm willing to give you lots of authority, lots of responsibilities, but you have to deliver these things. There has to be a mandate between you and the people. And if you fail to deliver, you have to step down. So earlier, let us say I'm elected into a position. I remain there for 5 years till the next elections come. And there also, due to the local dynamics, I may manage to get re-elected and continue for another.
So now you're saying there is no such sense of entitlement.
There's no sense of entitlement. It's all performance based. Perform or perish. So imagine a government bringing these kind of laws, and normally, of course, the panchayat representatives also in some sense are politicians. So one would not have imagined that a political administrative system will bring in laws which will not be, protecting the interests of fellow politicians. Ideally, a politician would like to give to another politician a sense of sinecure, that you are here forever, even if you don't do anything, we'll take care of it. But it is just the ever. So a new governance paradigm is being seen in some of these kind of decisions. So this is what I wanted to tell you. Governance is very important, but responsiveness, people centricity, and a very strong sense of accountability has to be there in that.
That's exactly the 3 points that I was about to bring on after the 2 that we just started with. So, because I'll just loop it back to the point that I made, that is responsiveness. So when it comes to any sort of system reform, when you're trying to change the system, when you're trying to introduce a new way, whether it is for a incentive or, even to, so we have to maintain this carrot and stick method. We have to incentivize as well as show some sort of penalty that if you don't do this, you will be actually losing the privilege that you have. So, how do people respond to such things, and how do you manage the responsiveness in this respect?
So these two things, the carrot and stick,
Yeah.
incentives and accountability, disincentives, they are true at the level of governance. But
Yeah.
you need to do something else also to
Yeah.
bring people close to you. See, right?
Absolutely.
Again, I'll give you a personal example. This is not
Yeah.
a governance example, but the example that I'm going to share now is, in some ways, suggests a very deep kind of malady which exists in the governance system in our country. So, some years ago, actually many years ago, I used to work in the Hyderabad Urban Development Authority. So, every big city in the country has an urban development authority. So, for instance, you live in Bangalore, so you have what is called the BDA, the Bangalore Development Authority. Delhi will have DDA. The counterpart organization in Hyderabad is called the HUDA, Hyderabad Urban Development Authority.
Yeah.
I used to be the vice chairman of this body. So one of the responsibilities of this body was to look after all the water bodies in the city.
Mhm.
And as you would know, it is true of Bangalore as well. Hyderabad also has large number of water bodies, and the best known water body, which is also the biggest and it's also a kind of a tourist attraction, is called the Hussain Sagar Lake. It
Yeah.
is in the middle. You might have seen images. There is a tall Buddha statue in the middle of the lake. So at that point in time, we had received some Japanese grants to do some treatment of the water quality, because the water was becoming contaminated and lots of pollutants were entering. So there was a huge Japanese project going on to treat the water, make the water quality better, and I was implementing that project. So I mean, we were all very focused on that lake. So one day, I was called for some meeting, and I was going in my car. I was driving past that lake, and I was looking at some papers, and occasionally I was looking outside. And then I noticed there was the traffic was moving a bit slowly, so I could observe things in a kind of a observant way. And what I noticed was that just little above me, a very posh kind of car stops, and a couple gets down, and it's a very expensive kind of a car. So obviously the people who are inside the car are well-to-do people, presumably educated
Educated.
people, maybe doing some profession or a business or whatever. They get down, a couple get down, they're carrying some stuff which is not very clear what it is, and they go up to the bank of this lake, and they throw everything in that lake. And impulsively, because I'm looking after that lake and some
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
is being spent, and if before my eyes someone is dirtying
Yeah.
the, doing some stuff and all, impulsively I get down from my car, and then and since the traffic was slow, I could kind of walk up to them. And then I walked up, and I was slightly agitated. Then I introduced that I look after this lake. Why are you throwing all this stuff? I mean, this is not how people behave, or responsible people like you behave. And you won't imagine what this person's or this couple's answer was. This couple's answer was that, why are you so bothered? We also pay taxes.
Oh
I mean,
my
this.
God.
So imagine his understanding of citizenship is that as long as I'm paying my taxes, I
Yeah.
can get.
We can abuse the resources given to us.
It is not my responsibility.
Yeah.
So even if I dirty something, since I am paying taxes, and since you are claiming that you are from the government, you
Yeah.
take the tax and clean that stuff. So this is how and of course there are hundreds of other such examples also. All these examples show one thing: the amount of disconnect which is there between the people and the government. So
Right.
by paying taxes, I have done my duty, and I have nothing else to care for. As a government, it is your responsibility. So obviously, if this is the mindset, if everyone feels that way, then this doesn't help in promoting any cause, not much at all for the causes relevant to sustainability. But at the same time, we need to dive deeper. I mean, it is no point blaming those couples that they are ignorant, or maybe they are some rustic kind of people. They may
Yeah.
be driving a Mercedes, but they are as good as some rustic villager. I mean, there's no point in blaming them. It is very
Challenge is, how do we address this kind of
apathy, this kind of mindset. And obviously, if you really dive deep into where is that answer coming from, where is that thinking coming from, you will realize that the government itself has a lot to blame. See, all the while when I have remained completely non-participatory in my approach, I don't consult the people. I don't take steps to gather what is people's priorities, would they like to do, how would they like that to be done. If everything is centralized at maybe at the cabinet level or a few ministers level, and so on and so forth. So obviously, how will you expect people to appreciate anything which is going around them? And the best they can think of is that let me not become a criminal by not paying taxes. So I pay taxes, and therefore I'm a good citizen, and nothing else is required for me. So when you say that we look at governance framework for sustainable development goals, one of the most important thing is that how do you develop that trust, confidence? How does your credibility go up? See, many times people don't also want to approach or share or make their views known to people, particularly to the government, because in the eyes of the people, the credibility of the government is a big zero. They think that even if I tell something, they are going to do what is their own vested interest, and this is just a sham. If they are asking me or telling me what to do and how to do, it's just a sham. Eventually they'll do what pleases them or what is their vested interest. So how do you come out of I mean, this has become very, very complicated. So a solution which I thought will work well, particularly for sustainability related issues, is to do this at a very micro level. I mean, sitting in Hyderabad and deciding what to do, how to involve the people, perhaps is too far-fetched as of now. The correct way is to do it at a very, very micro level, small neighborhoods of people, small communities of people, mobilize them. If in their eyes the credibility of the government is zero, then don't front the government before them. I mean, bring others. Let us say a local NGO has much more strong credibility. Ask them to elicit people's views, people's priorities. Let us say the sarpanch is liked by everyone. Let he be the front, and so on and so forth. So micro level solutions, micro level answers.
I'm sure, because that reminds me the discussion that we had when I was in Hyderabad, when I met you
Yes.
in that IS Officers Club. You mentioned this particular point of hyper local solutions, right? So just coming to that point, so when you talk about hyper local solutions, how do you ensure that the community engagement at the broader level is up to the mark? Because ultimately people need to see the big picture as well. So while hyper local and micro issues are as much relevant in order to execute, but when it comes to keeping people at pace with the overall development and scenario, how do you manage that? What kind of engagement level activities are there?
Yeah. See, Gayatri, in my opinion, and this is borne by almost 3 decades of experience in the government,
Sure.
is that the building block has to be hyper local.
Right.
But I agree with your point also, but they must have the big picture also. They must have the big vision. See, many times what happens is that when you attempt a hyper local kind of a solution or an intervention, but if they don't have the understanding of the big picture, sometimes they give up. So for example, if I tell that the world requires 1 trillion trees to be planted, I mean, that is the goal. If this climate change has to be arrested, at least 1 trillion trees have to be planted, otherwise nothing will happen. Now, if I tell this to any common person that 1 trillion tree has to be planted, I mean, the number is enormous in his mind, and he will think that what is it? I mean, this is such a huge thing. So even if I don't do anything, how does it matter? In any case, whatever I do will be futile. But if I'm able to mobilize millions of such hyperlocal communities and tell him that while your responsibility in your village, under your panchayat, under your sarpanch, is to plant 100 trees, but in our state of Telangana, there are 50,000 villages who are being motivated in a similar way, and all of you together are achieving a bigger goal, and rest of the countries are doing something else, and so on and so forth. So you start hyperlocal, but eventually you have to federate those hyperlocal aspirations into that bigger picture. So you cannot lose sight of the big picture, but the building block has to be hyperlocal. If I don't mobilize local community into some kind of an action, then nothing happens on the ground, is what my experience has been.
That's great. So I'm sure that through the hyperlocal activities, you're able to seek participation also from the citizens in a very, hello, you can hear me? Uh, Hello, Jesh, your
Yeah,
video
yeah, I can hear you.
paused. Okay.
Yes, yes, I can hear.
Okay,
I
okay.
can hear you.
Yeah, so I'm asking the participation of people is also that is easier through the hyperlocal activities, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, but the additional point, the supplementary point which I want to mention is that you have to make an effort to mobilize the people. You have to spend resources, you have to spend time, you have to identify the right kind of mobilizers who can sit with the community, bring them around a common issue. And obviously, community is also not a very homogeneous community, particularly in our country. We have to admit it. I mean, we have to face the reality.
Yeah.
People have various kinds of divisions, and I mean, it's a legacy. Our country has communities, religions, castes, and economic class, and so on and so forth. So all that is there, but it is still possible. It is still required to invest in that kind of mobilization at a hyper local level. It won't happen just by itself. I can have a very romantic view that there are 50 people living in a village. They all sing songs together when they go to their fields, but nothing of that kind happens. You have to actually, if you want them to sing a song, you have to make an effort to bring them together, tell them why they should sing a song, and so on and so forth. It doesn't happen by itself. So if you believe that bottoms up approach will work, the building blocks are at that level, you have to effort in that mobilization. You have to bring some people, you have to spend some money, and it takes a while. It doesn't happen overnight. So don't expect something to happen overnight, but that is a very vital investment. Unless you make that investment, things won't start happening thereafter.
Great. So that also makes me question the kind of impact one could have when we are trying to fight a pandemic like COVID. Because here we are trying to deal with all the issues together. One is engaging the community. Second, trying to be innovative about the solution. And third is that we are not prepared for it, and there is no planning which is already in place. So how do you manage something like that?
So COVID again is a very good example, Gayatri, of everything that we have spoken so far. How you have to involve the communities, how some solutions happen at a hyper local level, but at the same time you have a top down driven vision,
Yeah.
and there are some support and resources, etc., which get mobilized from the top. So this is exactly what needs to be done. And again, as you know, Kerala was one of the first states which for a long period of time successfully managed COVID. Of course, unfortunately there is some resurgence apparently in Kerala also. So, but anyway, whatever they did, at least in the months of April, May, etc., was in many ways exemplary. And in my state also, in Telangana also, we try to emulate a little bit of what this Kerala model was. And again, Kerala model was based on hyper local. So, as you know, because of the nature of the virus, you have to prevent contacts. I mean, you have to prevent people from moving arbitrarily and then spreading it. So lots of this community monitoring, community watch is required, which was done well. And in both Kerala as well as Telangana, and now in many other states also, what has been developed as a key strategy or a core strategy is called containment areas or containment zones. So let us say there is some spread, there is some number of infection, let us say in my neighborhood. So this whole area becomes a containment zone, and the locals maintain a vigil to ensure that no one from this area goes out, and no one who is not properly sanitized or checked, and that too for very essential reasons only, is allowed to come. So there is some kind of a community. And again, in some states, they try to do it through a policing way. Like I'll post 20 people, police around you. So the experience of those states shows that these policing solutions are not sustainable and long term. I mean, if you put this kind of a policing solution, people also find ways of violating it. See, you live in this neighborhood for, let us say, decades and years and all.
Yeah.
Your knowledge about the lanes and by lanes and
Yeah.
stuff like that is much more than any other police person. So if the police tries to cordon you and keep a watch, etc., as if you're a thief or some kind of a lawbreaker, then someone or the other will find a way to kind of actually break the law. But instead of police, if the community itself says through an enlightened consultation process that it is important for us to remain safe. A few of us have got it, but ensure that it doesn't spread to more number of people. So this kind of approach works better. So this is a good example of how a bottoms up community centered solution through this management of containment zones or containment areas has worked well, definitely in Kerala, to a large extent in Hyderabad, in Telangana, and I guess in many other states also. But that has to be supplemented. See, I contain the disease in this area, but there are lots of other things which we require. For example, everyone in this area needs to be tested frequently, and then if someone's condition is getting worse, you have to take care of his healthcare, etc. I mean, those things are beyond the community. Suppose my oxygen levels are going down, the community can't respond to it. The government has to take over, bring the best possible healthcare treatment. So a mix of top-down or centralized infrastructure, economic support, etc., along with a containment strategy, a strategy where the contacts are identified, isolated, monitored. That seems to be working well for COVID.
So I would want to know, how would you use a situation like COVID-19 in order to communicate the value of, sustainable development to the communities? Because this is the best way to make people understand the importance of it, and also the criticality and the urgency with which we have to address these issues.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we are still going through that pandemic. So, we still need to do a lot to bring the spread of the disease to an absolute zero. But every day, every week, we are drawing some very important insights from this pandemic, which tomorrow should become very important guiding principles of our life. So first of all, the sheer importance of hygiene, things like hand wash and keeping yourself clean. And then even if you have the slightest bit of infections or any kind of ailments, you should wear a mask so that you don't kind of infect. So the mask is not just a requirement for COVID alone. In fact, I know for sure that in countries like Singapore or Japan or Korea, etc., masks are worn practically by everyone who has even the slightest amount of cough and cold and all that, because that sense that I care for others. I mean, if I have a cough and cold, I obviously need to take some medicine or do something else to get better. But I am also responsible for someone else. So I'm always having a mask so that I don't sneeze on someone or spread germs through my coughing and sneezing, etc. So this is an important lesson on how do you manage your own personal hygiene and how do you take care of the well-being of the society. The other important lessons are about this micro level management of the disease, which I spoke about, how communities have to be involved in management. You cannot have a policing kind of a top-down scenario in which everyone is keeping an eye on everyone. I mean, that does not work well. Lots of lessons about the distress, lots of lessons from the distress which we have seen in migrant workers, as all of us know now. The sudden announcement of lockdown and sudden enforcement of lockdown impacted them the most. So how do you transform yourself into a humane society, into a caring society, and so on and so forth. Similarly, we know that when people are stressed beyond a point, when they face enormous levels of distress, sometimes their own behavior becomes completely unsustainable. I mean, they might have practiced sustainability focused practices for generations, but if they have been pushed in a corner, if they face some very unprecedented kind of crisis, so sometimes they start doing unsustainable things also. And again, it's not to blame anyone, but if you are prepared better in to deal with these kind of eventualities, then you can manage. So I'll give again a good example from Telangana. Now, you would know that the period of COVID also coincided with the agriculture seasons, a harvest season, the Rabi harvest, and then the Kharif sowing. Now, all these are important seasons and important economic activities, livelihood activities for a large majority of people. Practically everyone who lives in a village in Telangana depends on agriculture, either directly or indirectly. Of course, COVID was there, pandemic was there, cases were
Just a
increased.
small question here so that people are able to put this in perspective. What kind of population is living in rural areas when we talk about Telangana?
Yes. So Telangana has a population of about 35 million, 3.5 crores that is, and 54% of it is rural. So 54% of 3.5 million. So,
Several countries, I would say.
yeah, so still a very large population. And we knew that COVID is there and it's spreading in a very uncontrollable way. But we also felt that allowing agriculture operations to continue without any disruption, without any break will also be very important to provide sustenance to the livelihoods of these hundreds and thousands and millions of people who live in the rural areas. So with, of course, with right kind of precautions, we opened up the agriculture sector completely. In fact, much earlier than other states did. And that had a very positive impact. So at this point in time, in the rural areas, even some of the people who had gone to other states to work, for example, lots of people from Telangana work in the textile mills of, let us say, Surat and Bhiwandi,
Yeah.
and Sholapur and all those neighboring districts of Maharashtra. And when those mills and all got closed, many of them came back. But I read about it in some other states that when the migrant workers have come back, it added to the kind of strain of the local infrastructure, the livelihood support system. But no such strain was observed in Telangana because the agriculture activities were allowed to continue in full swing. So these are some of the points which I'm trying to make, that if you're aware about what consequences will be if you disrupt some of these activities, then I mean, you are not very foresighted in your decision making.
Absolutely. So a lot of foreplanning goes into all these things, even when it is about, meeting a unprecedented situation.
Sure.
So, this is brilliant. And in Telangana, I'm sure since you are so much focused on innovation per se, and
Yes.
the startup ecosystem, which is so thriving in the country right now, and several countries in the world are taking cue from India when it comes to, coming up with new solutions. So, what kind of efforts from the governance side have you been leading? What kind of new initiatives have been put in place?
Sure. So let me tell you about the newest initiative which is
Sure.
going in the areas of promoting innovation, promoting entrepreneurship, etc. See, we say something about our country all the time, but we don't really explore it in its correct form and depth. We all admit that there is lots of native wisdom in our country. We keep saying that there are lots of bright people in villages and community. They might not have been educated for very high degrees, etc., but they carry lots of native wisdom. And you will also realize that things are not perfect in our villages. I mean, no village in our country or a small town in our country can claim that it is a paradise on earth. There are hundreds and hundreds of unattended problems and something or the other which is broken, which has not been fixed. But we also know that in no part of our country do we see some kind of a rebellion happening every day. Like villagers have come on the streets, this is broken, this is not working, this is distressful, we can't live with it, we can't tolerate this. We don't see these kind of uprisings, these kind of rebellions. One answer to this is that everyone has got used to it, so no one cares, no one bothers. But the reality is that that a number of these local problems, etc., get fixed by the people in their own local ways. There are people who create some innovative solution by doing something which in our language we use a derogatory term which is called jugaad. They do some quick fix kind of thing. But if you explore what these jugaad solutions are, you will also appreciate that lots of science has gone into it. There has been some application of mind to create that solution. So it is not a worthless solution or a useless solution. It is not a very refined solution, which is true, but at the same time it is a solution which has created some relief to the people. It has helped them in some way. So what we are now trying to do for the last couple of years in Telangana is to identify who these grassroots innovators are. So we have started running a program which we called, it has a Telugu name. In Telugu, it is called Inti Inta Innovator. In English, it means an innovator in every home. So there is a person in every home who has the capability of creating innovative solutions for the pressing problems which people face. And we have started a very deep community-led program to identify such people. And every day for the last 2 years, what we do is that on 15th August, we actually, as you know, on the 15th August, that ceremonial flag
Yes.
hoisting, then that parade, etc., and gathering of people, all that happens. So every year, where the parade happens in the districts, we actually showcase all these grassroots innovations in whichever form they are. They may not look very refined, very polished, but what solutions are they offering? So every district, there are 33 districts in Telangana. We showcase 15, 20, 25, 30 such solutions. And this year, because the Independence Day was not celebrated in its full pomp and glory and all,
Yeah.
we did it on the internet. I mean, it's an online exhibition now, online display. And everyone can watch it. So we have a organization in Hyderabad, which is called the Telangana State Innovation Cell, TSIC. So if you go to the website of TSIC, you can find out the link on which all these inter innovations are displayed. And this year's displays are also amazing. So I can quote one example. A few months ago, just recently, in fact, during the early days of this COVID pandemic, there was a swarm of locusts which had attacked crops in Rajasthan to begin with, but they had come up to Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and they were almost at our Telangana border also. And the locusts, as you know, once they attack, I mean, they wipe off everything. So one school girl, actually, you can see that on the internet, that link. She created a solution through which she recorded the voices of wild animals, like wild boars and bears and all. Yeah, and then if you play that, then she found that these insects, birds, etc., they get scared. So these kind of things. So very, very simple, but very timely solution, something which is about to hit me. So I find a solution to take that. So this kind of social innovation, rural innovation, grassroots innovation is again something which we feel that we should not miss out on. And then what we do is that once you shortlist some number of innovations, so in the exhibition, the virtual exhibition that I spoke about, you can see 65 such rural innovations displayed. And now it is our responsibility, a responsibility which we have taken upon ourselves, to refine those solutions. See if, first of all, the government itself can be the first user of those solutions. And secondly, help them commercialize it. So convert it into a proper product or a solution, develop a go-to-market strategy, any kind of seed fund which is required.
Are you able to do that with all the solutions that come to you, or there is a screening process and only for the best ones it is?
Yeah, so for the best one. So 65 have been identified, but the remaining which we could not onboard, we still have given them some feedback to them. So what needs to be done for them to work on it further. And we have a government run prototyping lab in Hyderabad, which is called T-Works. So many of these solutions where some machinery is involved. So T-Works will guide them on how to perfect that machinery, how to improve the technology. And then the country's largest tech incubator is located in Hyderabad called T-Hub. So T-Hub is there. Then some of the solutions, as I told you, have been created by women. So there is a V-Hub, an institution called V-Hub, which is meant to promote entrepreneurship and innovation amongst women. So these institutions in Hyderabad. Similarly, we have a fourth institution, which is called RICH. See, Hyderabad has a large number of R&D institutions, both within the government sector and the private sector. So RICH's job is to ensure that the doors of all these institutions open to startups. If you are a startup and if you want to, let us say, go to CCMB or ICRISAT or one of these top defense labs and ask them for some cooperation or collaboration, normally they won't give you too much of mind space or opportunity, but RICH does all that. So it understands from a startup what is his requirement in terms of R&D support or partnership. And then these doors get opened through RICH. So RICH, T-Hub, V-Hub, and T-Works. These 4 institutions will now support all these grassroots innovators, the rural innovators, and so on and so forth. And of course, I encourage you to look at the virtual exhibition. But when you do look at it, I'm sure you will feel happy that many of these solutions are low cost, practical, but extremely sustainable kind of solutions, keeping in mind the important objective of not doing any harm to the environment or to the nature, and so on and so forth.
If I were to ask you, 17 Sustainable Development Goals that UN has defined, out of those, if you were to rate Telangana, which are the top 5 goals that you are very proud of?
See, one goal is about water, where we have achieved amazing results. So Telangana has become the first state in the country, and now Telangana's model is now being emulated at a national level to provide piped drinking water to every household.
Okay.
I told you earlier that there are 35 million people, so roughly around 8.5 million households.
Yeah.
And many of these households are rural, they are remote, but regardless of where you are, you will get piped water supply. You just need to turn the tap and you can get water. And imagine, this also addresses large number of social issues.
Yeah.
See, in a this water tap water scenario, people in the villages typically would go to a common stand post and they will fetch the water. And I'm sure you know this, that typically this responsibility is put on the women. So women have to go and they have to, carry heavy buckets of water. And then, as you know, since the villages are all hierarchy driven,
Yeah.
so if you are at the bottom of the hierarchy, some injustice happens to you. So, this simple kind of intervention takes care of multiple social issues related to gender, related to social hierarchy, related to drudgery at work, and obviously safe water. What we give is a potable, treated, safe water. So lots of waterborne diseases, lots of health and hygiene for young children, all that. So I feel very proud that this particular goal, Telangana has become the role model in achieving it.
That's really commendable, Jayesh. Just one follow-up question to this, because you're talking about water distribution system, which is a great achievement, and we're also talking about high-quality potable water to be distributed to every household. So that's really something commendable. But at the same time, we also understand that water quantity and water crisis is another challenge to be managed. So how does it tie back to that goal?
Yes. So, I would have explained that as well. See, that is the second part. So, first of all, Telangana was ruled in historic ages by a dynasty which is called the Kakatiya dynasty. And it's a local dynasty. So, the Kakatiya dynasty, apart from other achievements, one very big thing which they did was that they created a large number of small water bodies, which are called small tanks. In Telugu, in our local language, we call them cheruvu. So there are 46,000 cheruvus which were constructed by the Kakatiya kings of yesteryears. Now, obviously, over a passage of time, these cheruvus were not well maintained, and they had a link system. So suppose there is cheruvu number 1 here. Once this cheruvu fills up, the surplus water through a canal goes to the next cheruvu. That fills up and goes to a third cheruvu. So there's a chain of cheruvus, a chain of tanks, so to say. So obviously, through negligence and over a passage of time, these canals got silted, people started cultivating, and cheruvus got silted, and water retention capacity was limited. Some of the cheruvus were completely obliterated. So in the honor of these Kakatiya rulers, our government, the Telangana government, started a massive cheruvu restoration project, which is also called Mission Kakatiya, in the honor of the Kakatiya kings who built all these cheruvus. And I don't have exact data, but my guess is that of the 46,000 cheruvus, 30,000 plus cheruvus have been restored. And all that has been done, bringing looking at the original topography. Lots of science has gone it. Where should the canal of this cheruvu come from? How do you ensure that the catchment of the cheruvu is made intact, so that if it rains upstream, water comes into that chervu, surplus goes there, it doesn't flood anyone. So that has led to a huge amount of groundwater regeneration. Now, we do not see, in olden days, I recall, of course, it was combined Andhra Pradesh, but in many districts of Telangana, we would face a drought-like situation.
Yeah.
All the drinking water bore wells, etc., etc., will dry up. So restoration of this 46,000 odd chervus under this Mission Kakatiya project has been one important step to provide the water table, which is required to create these distribution systems. Plus, we have two big rivers, the Krishna River and the Godavari River. So at appropriate locations, water from these rivers are also tapped, treated. So a chain of, so this drinking water supply project, this also has a name. It is called Mission Bhagiratha. Again, you know who Bhagiratha was. So again, in honor of the person who provided water to earth, here we are providing water to every household. So it's a very elaborate system of where the reservoirs are, which are the reservoirs fed by groundwater, which are fed by river water through pumping. And then there are community tanks in which water is stored, and to every household pipe has been given. So it's a very complicated scheme, but I can share something with you. The importance which the government attached to this scheme, it was so important that I recall our chief minister, we had elections, this is 2020. So we had elections in 2018. 2018. And when the chief minister was campaigning for the elections, I mean, when he was preparing himself for the elections, he had given a kind of an ultimatum to the Mission Bhagiratha department that if you do not provide 100% coverage by the time of next elections, then I will not contest that elections. So he raised the stakes so much that I will walk out of or walk away from that election if you can't deliver 100% Mission Bhagiratha to the people. So it has been delivered. In fact, every home in Telangana, you just turn the tap, and just like in our homes in Hyderabad or you in Bangalore, we just turn the tap and get the water. That is how it happens in all of Telangana.
That's great. So, what are the next two more, sustainable development goals that you are very proud of? I'm sure that you mentioned something about tree plantation as well.
Yeah, so I would like to speak about tree plantation also. Again, this is a project which is happening at a very massive scale, and some people have even told me, though I guess it needs to be cross-verified, that what is happening in Telangana is the third biggest effort of its kind in the entire human history of the tree plantation. Not in independent India or in the last 10 decades or something. In the entire human history, the number of trees which are being planted and the efforts which are being made to sustain those plantations, to make those plantations.
How many are they, if you could?
2.3 billion. 2.3 billion trees. 2.3 billion trees have to be planted in a 6 years period. And we had touched 1.7 billion in till the last plantation season. I'm not very up to date about the latest numbers because the plantation seasons started again. I don't know what was the exact numbers which they would have achieved. But I do recall that when we would have hit the 2 billion mark, there would have been a big announcement that 2 billion plantation. And these are survival, not just planting. 2 billion have to survive, which means that you have to plant a little more in numbers. And again, lots of community effort, and you create a sense of pride in stakeholders in this plantation. So I had attended the World Economic Forum at Davos last year. Sorry, it was not last year. Actually,
2018.
This year. Actually, this pandemic has changed our time perspective. We think of everything as it happened
last year,
maybe before Christ or something, but it happened in January. In January, we were at Davos, and I remember a very big chunk of Davos's discussions and interactions and getting the Davos community together on some common agreed upon solution was around plantation. And in a Salesforce event where Mark Bainhoff, who is the founder of Salesforce, he's one of the drivers. I told you about that 1 trillion trees which the globe needs. He made a presentation, we all attended that, in which he said that there are 8 trillion trees already in the world, and we require 1 trillion more. And then only the impact of climate change can be reversed. And of course, 1 trillion is too big a number. So I remember our minister, he was telling them that we are doing this. So of your 1 trillion responsibility in the world, 2.3 billion will be contributed by Telangana. And he was very, very happy, and he was very excited. So that is again a very big achievement.
Yeah. So, and what is the third one? Because we were just talking about the top three that you would be really
Yes.
proud of. Yeah.
Yes. So again, the third one is, I don't recall what number of the SDG that is, but this is about housing for all,
Okay.
proper shelter, etc., etc. So again, our government is running a very ambitious program, which is called double bedroom housing program for all the poor people. I mean, for all the people who do not have a decent kind of, see, everyone has some roof over the head, but many of the roofs over the heads are not of a nature which decency or modern times demand. I mean, it should be a pakka roof. So for example, it's raining heavily in Hyderabad, but if you have a roof which is leaking all the time, it is made of some thatched material and all that, then obviously you are in a very precarious situation. So our government has started this program called 2 BHK housing program. I did not anticipate that you would have asked this question. Otherwise, I could have pulled out some images of those 2 BHK housing and shown to you on the screen. But these are amazing houses. So normally, see, in the government since decades, there is a program for providing housing for the poor. I myself, as district magistrate and all, I have implemented these programs. But in our bureaucracy, there used to be a joke that housing for the poor means poor housing. So the quality of those houses will be very, very shabby, very, very poor. You will try to cut corners everywhere. You will give the poorest kind of material, the smallest possible amount. And within years, these houses will all collapse. And it was all contractor driven. You help the contractor make some money. Nothing happens to the people. Besides the bare house, no other habitation improvement would happen, etc., etc. So the way Telangana is approaching is completely different. First of all, we are giving them big houses. These are called double bedroom houses, so 2 BHK with 2 bathrooms, etc. So our chief minister is very particular that if there are women in the houses, they must have their own privacy, they must have their own space. Two bathrooms must be there, and these are all being constructed wherever there is a constraint of space in a multi-story way. So some of the housing blocks are even 20-story high. I mean, there are 20 floors. And then all the amenities in and around the houses, a proper garden, some walking track, a small recreation area, the way you see it in a modern gated community or in a apartment complex. Yeah. And the most amazing thing is that all this facility is given to the poor person absolutely free.
Wow.
Yeah, not even a rupee is taken from that person. And again, I don't recall the exact number, but we are going at a saturation model. So every person, in fact, one of the very first things which the government did, Telangana is a new state, as you would know,
yeah.
Being in 2014. Within a month maybe, or a couple of months of the new state coming into being, our chief minister conducted a massive survey in the state. He gathered all kinds of household information. And it was done in a very unique way. See, normally surveys, you can game the survey, you can manipulate, but it was a single day survey. Every household in the state was visited on the same day from morning to night by trained enumerators. So again, a very unique way of methodology of doing that survey so that no one can game that survey system. And whatever data we got, we have collated. So we know very, very precisely how many people are there who do not have houses. And then we have triangulated that data, survey data, with secondary data. So for example, if I'm a poor person, yeah. Let us say the survey shows that I do not have a house. I correlate it with what are the other assets that I have. So for example, I have as a state data of every electricity consumer of the state. So I check from my database, how much of electricity bill do you pay every month? Suppose you claim that you are a poor person and you are paying 10,000 rupees every month. So obviously something is not right. Or suppose I find your name in the list of people who own a car. I mean, data of all the cars registered in Telangana.
Hmm.
I find your name in that list also. So it gives rise to some suspicion that you're claiming to be a poor person, but you have a car, you are paying 10,000 plus electricity bill. So with proper triangulation, we now know exactly how many people who require houses, and they are being given this amazing housing program, absolutely free of cost.
So, just we are getting a question as a follow-up to this point. This is from Mr. Gaurav Pandey, and he's asking that this concept is great, but how long can we keep giving fish to people instead of teaching them how to fish?
See, so I mean, we anticipate these kind of questions. The thing is that if you are the poorest of the poor, and if you are living in absolutely precarious, dilapidated kind of situation, giving a house to him is like changing or transforming his entire life. I can teach him to fish. It is not to say that I'm not teaching him to fish. So it is not that if I give a house to some poor person, I wash my hands off, I'm not going to help you in any other way. Tata, bye bye. Rest is your own responsibility. It's not like that. We teach him to fish also. But see, so these kind of questions can only come from those who never live in a absolutely dilapidated, precarious, vulnerable kind of situations. If you go to some person and ask him, shall I teach you to fish, or would you like to take a house now and learn to fish later? He'll always say, give me the house first and teach me how to fish also. These are not mutually exclusive. I'm giving him fish, but I'm also teaching him how to fish.
Okay, sure. So now that we are almost done with the session, I would like to leave the room open for Q&A. And one question that I have on board already is about the tree plantation drive. So how do we ensure that this tree plantation drive is coupled with livelihood creation as well as health generation for the citizens?
Yes. So again, the species which are selected, again, I'm not an expert in it, so I only have a general understanding of this program. But two comments which I can make to your question is, one is that the choice of species is very important. So typically the species which are fruit bearing, and also similarly in our state, there are some number of tribal habitations. There are what are called agency areas where the tribal community lives. And as we know, their relationship with the forest, with nature is much more integral. They in fact survive on forest produce for their livelihood, etc. So in these kind of places, lots of species which are actually from uh, from uh, from from the category through which you can earn some livelihood, some incomes, those kind of things are there. So choice of species, how close are you planting it to the habitation? If there is a school, can you plant as much as possible near the school? Now our state government has started trying out from this year a plantation concept which is called Miyawaki. So this has been introduced by a Japanese scientist, which means that in a small space, you can do some very dense kind of
We
a
are
thing.
doing that, Jayesh. I think I mentioned this to you, Mission Prakriti,
Yeah,
that we are doing. So
that's
it's
right.
a vertical forest, very dense, multi-layered, and yeah.
So I have also seen a couple of Miyawaki plantations in my industrial parks, and they look very impressive.
Yeah.
And the second is, see, the whole process itself sustains lots of livelihoods. As I told you, one very important component of this entire plantation program is rearing the nurseries. You have to prepare the plant material, and that plant material eventually gets planted to meet that 2.3 billion 2.3 billion target. So the nursery activities themselves are labor intensive, and they sustain the livelihoods of lots of people. And let me share something very interesting here also. Uh, in any city, including Hyderabad, typically you find lots of people. Again, a very sad reflection on our society, but unfortunately, that is the reality. You find a large number of people begging on the streets, when typically near the street lights. You will notice when cars stop, some people come up and then they ask for some charity, etc. And of course some people do that charity, so that's a different issue. But then in Hyderabad, what was done was, this is going on for the last 3-4 years. All such people who were typically found to be begging at the street junctions, near the traffic lights, etc., they were actually rehabilitated through this nurseries program. So the local municipal corporation engaged all of them, all such people who, and of course, many people who are at the street corners begging and all. Not all of them are very healthy. Some of them are very destitute kind of people, elderly. Some of them are suffering from some disabilities and so on and so forth. But it was found that whatever is your health situation, there is some work or the other in a nursery operation which you can always do. If you are not mobile, the best you can do is that you have plastic bags. You can pour, this the earth, the planting earth, etc. in that bag. I mean, that bagging work doesn't require you to move here and there, sitting somewhere. And they started getting money, which was much more than what they would have done. Plus, imagine the human dignity. So you are standing on the roadside asking people for charity, and many of them are at literally the last state of their life. I mean, they're just counting days, and at that state also, in that stage of their life also, they do not have human dignity. So livelihoods of many people, thousands of people, get supported through the plantation program, including some of the poorest of the poor, some of the most vulnerable people.
So we'll just take the last question for the day, and that is about how we are integrating corporates with the community initiatives in order to, give shape to the governance agenda. Like, how are you bringing all these stakeholders together in the ecosystem?
So again, I'll give you a real example to tell you how corporates are engaged. See, every corporate has to participate in what are called CSR programs.
Right.
I mean, not every, but we know that which kind of corporates have to participate in CSR programs. All the major ones have to participate in the CSR program. In Telangana, we have created a body of the government and the corporates and some NGOs put together, which is called Telangana Social Impact Group,
Okay.
TSIG. And what we do is that we prepare a pool of projects where the government investment is low, or the priorities are much more than what the government is able to spend, and pose them before corporates. And let us say 5 corporates show interest in a particular type of project, then we ensure that they don't duplicate each other's work. They also complement each other. And any last mile kind of support which the corporates require from the government, this TSIG, TSIG as we call them here, they handle. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned earlier that Hyderabad has many lakes.
Yes.
And the biggest of them is the Hussain Sagar. So Hussain Sagar, of course, with the government, with the Japanese government's help, work is going on. But there are lots of smaller lakes dotting the whole of the city.
Yeah.
And you notice that there are many other lakes also which are contaminated, encroached, and the quality of life around that water body is poor. So many corporates have now owned, or let us say adopted, these lakes. Many of these lakes have been adopted by either one corporate or 4 or 5 corporates put together. But we are very clear that it is not a question of just spending money from the top. A corporate, for them, it is very easy to sign a check of, let us say, 50 lakhs and 1 crore and hand over that check. But we do not want to do that. We want the corporates actually to participate in even bringing the community of that neighborhood together. How will they, so involve them in planning. So if the community says that lots of our children would like to cycle, so can you create a cycling track around the lake? So generate the requirements of the community through again a bottom-up community driven process. If people say that in olden days, in the time of my grandfather, we used to catch fish in this lake, there was a big fishing opportunity. Then once the water quality becomes better, we negotiate with the fisheries department, get some fish seeds immersed in that lake, and so on and so forth. So corporates actually play a big role in working with the community in doing the joint planning, joint implementation, joint monitoring. So they in some ways co-create a good neighborhood, a good facility, community asset by involving the community members. So one good example of how corporates and people can work together, but all this gets facilitated through this TSIG. So as I mentioned earlier also, you require the government to play that role of facilitating, and then someone else does that mobilization, and then response to the mobilization's demands come from the top.
There's just one more question, Jesh, and after that we can actually give it a pause. The question is from Shaligram Soni, and the question is: any program to promote solar cooking and drying zero energy budget natural cooking systems to achieve United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through proper training, exhibitions, demonstrations, and appropriate activities for double income of farmers and laborers?
So I see this question. It's in the chat box. It is to all panelists. So why don't you answer? You are also a panelist.
No, it is for you, I'm sure. I can answer, but right now you're the guest. And
So fine. So see, I wanted to evade answering because frankly, I don't know much about this subject. But I will, rather than giving some answer and getting away, I would take this as a good input. So the last point which he mentions, what Shaligram has mentioned, that it can be linked to doubling the farmer's income, doubling the income of laborers. So this is a very important national priority, as all of us know.
yes,
During this Atmanirbhar
Bharat.
Bharat programs and campaigns also, this has been highlighted. National government, the Prime Minister has announced important schemes. State is also well aligned with these goals. And I'm involved in lots of digital work, tech related work, which is happening in the state of Telangana to double farmers' income. But I'll take this as a valuable input that giving them solar cooking opportunities and drying opportunities, etc., will also contribute to their. So I'll work more on it. So that is all I can say now.
And I also take this input from you, Mr. Soni, that we have a mission called Mission Prakriti, and through that we are providing a lot of livelihood opportunities to the farmers. And there is a food processing system which is connected to this whole thing, because whatever food produce and yield we are getting from the farms, that has to be converted into a specific form. And there I think the suggestion that you're giving, that's much easier, and it is also a renewable energy based solution, and we can definitely explore that. So, fine, Jayesh, thank you so much for your time, and it was really great chatting with you. Any final thoughts or message that you want to leave us with?
Oh, I also enjoyed this conversation. Also opened my eyes to so many other possibilities that you and the participants raised through their questions and chat, etc. So I'm grateful to everyone. But this is not the end of me. You will see me again after 2 weeks. This time I'll be the host and I'll be interviewing a very important guest.
That's great. So, any other thoughts that you wanted to share before we leave our audience, because that particular chat session will also involve something connected to this chat session. So, as I can tell you, and as an overview, the connected topic remains the same. We are trying to explore measures of good governance for sustainable development, and in the next chat session, Mr. Jayesh Ranjan will be interviewing. Jayesh, why don't you?
Yes. So I will be interviewing a diplomat, an international diplomat who works for the British High Commission. His name is Andrew Fleming, and he has been in India for the last 2-3 years, and he has been to some of the poorest parts of the country, the state. Also, he is a very people's person. He enjoys talking to people. He has worked in Africa also, so he can share with us. See, typically we speak about Africa as the continent rather, which is pulling down the country. But the person who lives there, understands the local dynamics, has a much more nuanced understanding of Africa. So we will be bringing a global perspective from the eyes of an international diplomat about good governance for sustainable development. And I would like to congratulate Gayatri for thinking of such a interesting format of having these conversations. It was very conversational. I really felt, I never felt that you have put me on a spot and asked me something which is too complicated or too difficult for me to answer. It was a very easy conversation. So you have set the bar very high. And when I interact with Andrew tomorrow, I will also do the same.
You're too modest, Jesh. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you will do a much better job. And you were so confident with your answers, so it was pretty natural for me to keep it flowing.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.